Hey, Brian, thanks for joining us. Can you start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about your career?
Sure, I'm Brian Becker. I'm a senior marketer executive with over 20 years experience. I've worked in real money gaming, e-commerce, and financial services. I've held leadership roles at Tipico, High Five Games, 100 Flowers, Thomson Reuters, and Chase. So my career spans across both B2C and B2B. And, I've had diverse focus areas across customer acquisition, retention and CRM, brand building and positioning, and I've managed 8 and 9 figure P&Ls, built teams from the ground up, and led high impact growth initiatives. In the last 4 years of my career, I've worked especially in the real money gaming and sweepstakes part of here in the US. And so it's been an incredible experience to translate some of my prior experience into this one.
Well, you're definitely an expert in this space. We appreciate you joining us. You've built and optimized successful loyalty programs at High Five and 1-800-Flowers in particular. What's your framework for designing a high impact loyalty system that scales, and how do you ensure it works across user types and LTV bands?
Yeah, because I've had a career that's jumped into different industries, I think very different experiences. And so I've built different models of loyalty. At 100 Flowers, we launched something and grew something called Celebrations Passport. It was a cross-brand program that rewarded customers across our portfolio. So, e-commerce for Harry and David, Cheryl's, 100 Flowers, and the focus was to unify the points accumulation, create rewards and exclusive deals, and to focus on convenience and developing an emotional connection with consumers. And so my part in that was leading a mobile app development to bring all of those things together into one place to activate over 2 million customers and give them an experience that rewarded them when they did kind of buy products across different brands. More recently at Tipico, we didn't build a full loyalty program. We built what we called a cashback system. It was very similar to what you experience from a credit card perspective, but integrated into a native style within the application that we use from a sports betting perspective. And so it was essentially directly integrated into the bet slip. So every 5 bets, you were given a certain percentage back based on the type of bet you did. And so, I think the effectiveness of that was, experiencing those rewards real time and, working towards a mission that was set up for you to complete. We were able to really reinforce trust, reward frequency, and do it in an automated fashion. And so upon releasing that system, we saw handle or betting volume increase by 50%. And then more recently at High Five Games, when I joined the organization, we didn't really have a loyalty system. So we built recently High Five Passport, which is a gamified system that rewards for streaks, has mission mechanics, incents more progression by rewarding higher daily rewards for the more you play. And we iterated the model frequently after we released it. So, as we got more data from customers, we adjusted the pacing, the value, the user experience, and the feedback there as well has been overwhelmingly positive. We have seen measurable lifts in engagement, play, and then purchases as well. And so, I think the theme for all of those initiatives has been loyalty programs can work when you segment users by their behavior, by their long-term value, and visibly reward them, they respond well. When you build a product and a customer experience that is easy to understand, that demonstrates and shows progress and makes the loyalty feel earned, not just bought, very, very beneficial. And then we've continually, I think for each of those programs, mix the frequency, the pacing, the experiential value. I think consumers like surprises. They like to feel like they're in a system that's constantly changing, that the carrot that they're shooting for is often in front of them, but kind of sometimes moving. And so you're continually trying to move that door where they're walking through to make them feel and appreciate a gamified experience. And I think above all, clarity, transparency, building a system that's intuitive, and then really, really kind of laddered and integrated well into the product experience.
Awesome. You've overseen CRM strategies at massive scale, obviously, in talking about some of those stories. How do you think about user journey orchestration across email, push, in-app when trying to convert a new user into a long-term VIP?
Yeah, my experience into CRM honestly is kind of ladders into the last 4 or 5 years. I was largely a brand marketer for a lot of my career, but since I started at Tipico and here at High Five, I've become much more a part of managing those processes, understanding the experience and trying to improve the cadence and frequency, which we do some of those things. And I think good CRM starts with mirroring the customer's life stage and value trajectory. So, you should be adaptive and personalized and not just follow a static calendar. I think when you think about the retail space, a lot of those programs and campaigns tend to be based on an event, whether it's like the Super Bowl or Christmas. And those things tend to be pretty consistent year on year. My experience here on the gaming side has been they kind of do the opposite. You don't have a static calendar. I think the strategy we've employed here is really important about those inflection points. The inflection points are when someone signs up and they're onboarded. In the beginning of that life stage, you want to, have really good education. Make sure that they understand the terminology. This whole space is very, very new in this country, unlike kind of Europe, where people woke up every day and there's betting parlors on the corner.
Right.
This is a really a new experience for them. And so that educational piece early on to build some trust is really, really important. And I think the other kind of side of the life stage, this is probably, the beginning and end of it. There's certainly so much in between that I'll kind of talk through is when someone develops a sign of churning, that you're responsive to that make it clear to them through a bonus or a free spin or a reward or an acknowledgement of their play with you to keep them playing with you. I mean, I think that the trueness of this space is that there are multiple options for players to choose from. And so, I think in this world, you're very, very sensitive to keeping them on board and then making sure they don't churn. And then in terms of the signals for like value, I think in the gaming world, it's all about high value customers, VIPs, providing white glove journeys to them, giving them exclusive bonuses, giving them someone to talk to, personalized outreach. I can't stress enough kind of the 20/80 rule that's in this industry that, at most 20% of your customers will drive 80% of your profits. Those are the customers that we're all trying to acquire, to retain, and to grow kind of within outside of our business. And it's competitive. So you're competing against some other operators to kind of retain those customers. And then from a channel perspective, I think in a mobile world, push is about driving urgency, nudging, emails about storytelling, education, and content. And then in-app is about reinforcement, personalization, and then instant gratification. You don't want to disrupt and create friction in their experience unless it's something that's really, really important. And I would just zoom out and say this is all about retention, right? You're trying to build confidence, that the product that you're managing is worth sticking around, and CRM becomes the most important storytelling tool to do that.
For sure. And when launching a new retention initiative, how much room is there for experimentation or in terms of tools, KPIs, and things, knowing that that trust is pretty paramount and you're fighting for, those same users as everybody else? It becomes very tricky to kind of balance those things. Can you walk us through kind of a test you're proud of and what level, if any, experimentation kind of fell within that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I've gotten more senior in my career and the world and ecosystem has changed a lot, I kind of assumed you would test less, but I found the opposite. I think you're always testing, especially in the gaming world where it is so competitive, where the ecosystem around us is changing so much. And so I think we do a significant amount of experiments. I think ideally they're structured, fast, and measurable. And so you do your best for some of those things. The tools that you use for orchestration, analytics, visualization, are super, super important. And so I've been able to use both proprietary and, I would say larger CRM tools and campaign measurement systems and I think I've seen the benefit of both. I think when I've used proprietary kind of company build tools, they're super powerful, but they're not user friendly. When I use kind of off the shelf CRM systems. They're easy to use, but then sometimes hard to configure. And so, I think in every environment I've been in, I've tried to adapt to the, kind of tools that we had. And then I think measurement is at the top of what I consider important for, any test or any new retention initiative. And so, we've used tools like Domo and Looker, and again, they each have their benefits, but making sure you get to some version of incrementality, understanding how a specific initiative is leading to, the general performance of the segment or uh, the product is really, really important. And so having really good partners in data science across my different kind of roles has been super, super important. And then what am I most proud of? I mentioned it before, but the cashback program that we launched at Tipico, is something that I thought was just really, really well done in terms of, the way it was perceived, the feedback that we got from players kind of during the process, and then the ultimate impact it had on the business. And so, I think the genesis of that is we saw frustration from users who just always felt like they were losing, right? There's a lot of losing
Mhm.
when you kind of gamble. Everyone thinks of the personification of the house. Um, and so, users that ascribe some version of luck or feel appreciated, and can develop trust, it goes a long way to retaining them. And so we integrated that kind of system directly into the product. Users would see rewards in real time. There was animations when they received it. And so, yeah, I mean, it felt, let's say, better when you lost a bet. But, it felt like it was a house and a system and a tool that was there to support you. And I think it made the product more trustworthy. It rewarded without adding a lot of complexity. A lot of times in these products, the rewards have rules, guidelines, kind of different aspects that are either hidden or unclear. And so bringing some of that stuff forward really made a visible impact in the experience. And then, as I mentioned before, really, really positive response, both in the performance numbers that we saw, growth in customer kind of play, and then the anecdotal feedback that we got from some of our bigger players, who spent more time with us, played with us more as we try to develop more share of wallet. And I think when you think back on those experiences, the best ones are the ones that you roll out gradually, that you test across different cohorts, because we didn't roll it out kind of to everyone at first. We had some time to test it initially and then refine some of the elements of the campaign as you go. And then I would just summarize by saying a great retention products solve problems that users didn't even know they had. And then in that way, when we did this cashback program, it gave players a sense of fairness and made them feel like the bet slip was even more alive.
Totally. I mean, I would have totally fallen for that. It's a great nudge towards loyalty without being too over the top or in your face. So I love that.
Yeah, and we went back to, like, think about it as like when you like one of those cards you get at a sandwich shop, and
Mhm.
like you punch something, and like for the fifth or sixth time you get something free. So we even tried to advertise and market it that way, so it felt very simplistic to a new customer that we potentially would be acquiring.
Yeah, you're kind of building on that organic behavior without being too over the top. In terms of, you've touched on trust. You've also touched on the difference between consumers in Europe versus in the US. For the US, what unique challenges do you think mobile real money gaming poses for marketers, and that most outsiders generally underestimate?
Yeah, and when you say outsiders, I'll personify it to myself as someone working at one of those companies, but then also relate it back to consumers and the learning curve that they have when they hear about a like sports betting or casinos, and then what the reality becomes. So, listen, I think RMG, first of all, is confusing by default. The terminology, the flows that are there, as I mentioned before, they're meant to protect the house. A lot of the complaints that you get from customers tend to be learning curve things like sweeps coins, boost stores, parlays, playthrough. Those are all terms. They're not everyday kind of terminology. And so they aren't really intuitive to a new player. And so, I think there is a lot of credence that you give to operators that either train these kind of on these sort of kind of words, or I think you even recently see FanDuel eliminate some of them to make the initial offer of someone coming in kind of more easier to understand or more intuitive.
Yep.
I think the other big challenge for a lot of the applications out there and for operators is that most of the apps look and feel the same. There's just a sea of sameness around the experience, which means when you do stand out, it makes a huge difference and there's huge differentiation. And that really starts with the first click, that every kind of journey that you're on is purposeful, is easy to understand. And when I think about my own career, I spanned a lot of different places. So my B2B experience brought me an ability to communicate around value very clearly as you sold to those sort of customers. In e-commerce, I learned how to kind of ladder and map friction and optimize each step of the journey. And so, as I came into the real money gaming space 4 or 5 years ago, I tried to apply some of those lessons. A lot of them didn't work, right? So I found out that I did fail a lot in kind of understanding how to properly reach a consumer. But as I said before, simplification of language, reducing the time to get a reward and to feel like you've won in this world, highlighting the unique value proposition you have at High Five. We recently released a feature called Spin Back that rewards customers, kind of having the VIP and kind of loyalty programs branded, simple terms like cashback, as I mentioned before, those are everyday terms that someone can relate to. Those are really, really important, right? As you think about building the products, marketing them, communicating them downstream to consumers, and so I've tried to apply a lot of those lessons through my career. And then I think the other thing that I've really tried to do that I just have observed is poorly done kind of in this space is don't assume users know what they're doing, right? Or what you're talking about. And so I think one of my rules has always been in the communications that we do, both, on in the web and then in email, show them, right? Short form video works really, really well here. Give them the feature and reinforce the value of it. I think if your app doesn't feel differentiated by the third session that a consumer has with you, then they're already on to the next one.
Totally. We ran a survey just looking at different types of players. So VIPs, kind of mid-tier players, and then the very casual. And we've seen super different behavior across all those. The retention strategies are tailored to those, so are pretty different. But, if you had to give one retention philosophy or tactic that works for each cohort, would that be the simplification that you just talked about?
Yeah, and I think you're right. There are different levels of value that customers have, and then there's different levels of investment that as an operator that you have for each of them, right? And so, at every operator I've been at, there's been some version of a customer scoring model that help to predict behavior. You look at some of the early aspects like someone's first deposit or purchase. You look at, are they, the total amount they play in a session. So there's some triggers and some indications that you get early on in their experience if they're valuable. And those are really, really important to key off of to, make sure that you assign the right amount of focus. And if they're a VIP, let's say the top 5% or sometimes even the top 2%, you're going to ascribe and assign different types of journeys to them. And so when I look at, the way that I segment customers for value, I would go back to there's probably three groups. There's the VIPs, right? That, as we said, the top 2 or 5%. And I think you prioritize, personalized support. You give them more money back. You have one-to-one bonusing that you do. And mostly you're giving them access. You're trying to make their experience and the recognition of them more visible. And so you treat them special and differently, right? It's your best customers. And so to go back to the B2B experience I had, right? It's making sure they feel and they know they're special because they've identified to you that they're willing to kind of play at a different kind of frequency or rate. I think the next group is what I would call our emerging customers, right? So you're really trying to figure out if those are potential VIPs. Everything's like a pyramid, and you're trying to get to the top of that pyramid. And I think with them, you're trying to figure out kind of what sticks, build habit forming systems like streaks, like weekly challenges, give them some predictability around rewards. What I've found is, they're loyal but conditional. If their value slips in terms of what we're providing them, then they'll churn. And then I think the last group is probably the other, let's say 80%. I mean, there are kind of casual players. They might truly just be people that are casual players, but some of them are, just people that are testing the product or the offering. And so, we often will use surprise and delight. We'll give them kind of regular public kind of bonuses. A lot of the things you see bigger operators do with like discounts, kind of free cash or free bets on, things like parlays. You're trying to figure out what their behavior is. And then you're often limiting the time that you give them to do it to see if they're responsive. So targeted spin drops, FOMO-based triggers, but they're the core of the business in terms of the quantity. But the VIPs are really the core of the business in terms of the profitability and where you're going to invest a lot of your kind of resource time. And then, I think you need to be efficient. So there's ROI thresholds that you set for each tier. You reallocate your marketing investment accordingly, and you're looking every single day at the performance of those different groups. Many of the channels that you kind of work through will have spend ceilings, so you're constant rebalancing. And then, I've worked in operators that have both opened and closed states. And so, yeah, you're conscious of some of those business changes as they happen, for each of those groups. It's to me not about spending more, it's about spending right. Often the worst investment you can make is overspending on someone that won't kind of return anything. So yeah, that's the constant kind of push and pull with kind of science, that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, those are big needle movers, obviously. If you're taking the other position and giving some advice to other marketers, what are the biggest monetization mistakes to avoid when trying to scale across these different cohorts?
Think over relying on offers, right? Assuming all users will respond to the same incentive, and then making sure that you see users play or bet with their own money, to establish that trust. But there's a mix and a balance between giving someone something for free versus giving them a sale or a deposit match or something that gets them to play with their own money. You're ultimately trying to get them to, contribute to their experience, but make sure that they're kind of truly someone that can be monetized. And so what works, cohort-based monetization tracks, as we talk about, especially for VIPs, post-loss, type re-engagements. And so at High Five, we've tested kind of really empathetic messaging after people lost a good bit in a short amount of time, if their wallet is low, because, we want them to have a good experience. And then we want to retain them and make sure that they're playing at a comfortable pace. And I think it's not always about urgency. I think the really healthy thing in this industry is, the increased focus on fairness and timing and making the user feel like they're still in control.
Well, Ryan, I mean, that was super insightful. I really appreciate your time. Where can the people find you? Is there anything cool that you're working on that you want to promote or any conferences that you'll be at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. If there's anyone that wants to connect, I'm always looking to meet new people. And then I think this journey of online gaming here in the US, it's a very, very small world. And so, yeah, happy to connect with folks. I think some of the things that we're working on at High Five that I think are exciting is just how innovative we are to building new features, to capturing value in new customers. And so, Spin Back is something I mentioned that I'm proud of, the loyalty program that we recently launched. So kind of the use of playthrough, right, which is true in real money gaming, but maybe not in, social gaming, which I think is a way for us to give more back to some of our players who play more. And then, yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed the transition I've gone through into this industry. It's like, it's just been born overnight. And so happy to meet other people and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.